welcome everyone to a special night and another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's guest that I have on, I had the privilege and honor to MC at the Full Disclosure Now Conference 2025 in Florida, and we have a huge topic-filled episode for you all tonight. So I normally don't say this, but I'm going to say buckle up for this one because we're going to go on huge adventures. And so to get us started, I am going to turn it over to my guest, the one, the only awareness extraordinaire, Nathan Ciszek.
Well, thank you for that, Michael, and I'm really glad to be here. It's an honor, and I liked your intro. So it was I liked how the sound just, the music just worked the emotion up until it just kind of reached a pitch, and then the show starts. So I like that.
Well,
anyway, it's pretty thought-provoking. So anyway, we talked about kind of roughly what we were going to discuss tonight, and I figured we would take the soul trap subject, the simulation subject that's floating around and has been for some time now, and I figure we should take that to a new place for you. I've only done it a couple of other places, so why not do it here? Okay, anyway, I'm a MyLab. I've been in the programs, that's how we say it, for at least 2 consecutive lifetimes. I know this because I have a pre-birth memory. It's actually a soul transference memory from a military installation. I don't know where it is. I have possibly it may be White Sands, but it could have been anywhere in the United States or anywhere for that matter elsewhere. But in the experience, I remember being put into a fetus at the 12th week after conception. And I remember standing in a lab and actually getting into a type of soul transference machine. And it took a long time to figure out exactly who was in that room with me. It also took a long time to figure out that I was in a room because initially it was a white haze in the room. And it had kind of like, I believe the white haze was there to make it look like heaven. So for the longest time, I thought that I had this weird fragmented memory of heaven. And then it evolved later in my late teens when I started having flashbacks, and they were in consecutive order as they happened. I got a net. Anyway, so what happened then is then I began having psychic experiences that were staged, and ultimately I was put through a type of false awakening to kind of keep me asleep, so to speak. The false awakening involved exploring a lot of different types of religions and things like that, which I think is normal for people like myself who were trying to figure out what's been going on with them and why they're having these experiences. But I was led down a false path into a variety of things. You name it. I've had love bites. I've had a cult experience. I was involved in an online cult. It was an Enki cult that had satanic symbolism. Satanic rituals in it, but it was basically Anunnaki. I wouldn't call it worship, but I would say basically alignment. And it was a composite religion, which actually turned out to be not ancient aliens that we were interacting with, but it turned out to be military MyLab handlers that were doing a social experiment, and they were luring people in like myself who were active in the programs, as well as people that I would consider to be either retired on the shelf or just never been used, but in a psychic family. And people were being subconsciously programmed to go into this. And essentially at that point, it turned my life upside down. I became a targeted individual. I was already getting targeting prior to that, but it was a bit less hands-on, and then things got pretty serious for a long time. So I've been through a very, very severe type of suppression, I would say, protocol and a program. And I had V2K for a very long time and so forth. And my story, I don't want to get into my story so much, maybe at another time, but I'm a victim of it, but I'm also a survivor of it. And I've been able to overcome the majority of the targeting. I've been able to overcome the work suppression. I've shut down the V2K. For the most part, I'm about 90% clean of their attacks. You're never completely immune to it. But I have a situation now where I can shield myself and then I can still learn from their attempts. Still puts me in a high risk, situation because they can stage accidents. I can't get hit with directed energy anymore because I've been able to kind of jam my electromagnetic frequency. And this is through interaction and a little bit of alter integration and a lot of oversoul integration, which is something I'll get into in a little bit. So that kind of gives you an idea of where I come from, and what's happened to me, and why I would be talking about these subjects. Having this experience or this memory always gave me a solid foundation to work with, because I knew that there was life after death, and because there was life before death in this case. I just didn't know what the nature of it was. And then I kept having these experiences, and they most cases they contradicted religion, but so I would jump around with various different religions, and I studied a lot of things, including astrotheology. I looked into various religions: Mormonism, Islam, Christianity, Satanism, Judaism, Hinduism, a lot of isms, probably a few other isms too. And it was just a long learning process. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to find my way home and to wake up. There was several things that I noticed about this reality. First and foremost is that it felt intuitively wrong that we weren't all psychic. And I noticed that some people were psychic, but according to the media and according to academia, or I call it quackademia, it couldn't be validated. But yet, the more research I did, and as the years elapsed, and as I got older, and we started getting these CIA, declassified information started flowing out on CIA.gov, we found out that the government and the U.S. military and private labs and so on, institutions were researching psychic abilities, and it actually did exist, but they were covering it up. And like early on in my life, I had an alien abduction, which started the whole thing as far as the military involvement in my life. So at that point, I became a TI technically. I think my first abduction was age 6. But it may have been sooner than that, because I had night frights that were earlier. It may even go back as early as 4 or 5. And of course, the reason why they like to get you early like that is because you're easy to do a trauma split or a fracture, basically, to fracture your personality into alters. When you're young like that, you're more suggestible. You're less able to handle the type of abuse that you have to go through in order for that to happen. So it's easier to get you then. So my abduction started young, but they were very, very good at hiding it. And I thought I was having night frights. I thought I was having nightmares. I had reoccurring dreams where I would jump up out of bed and there'd be a presence coming in the room, but I'd never see who the presence was. I would always sense it. It would put me in an incredible state of fear. And I would have this repetitive dream, which was actually a partial memory that was coming through, because they were putting screen memories in to cover it up. And then sometimes I would have a dream where the real memory would start to bleed through. So I would jump out of bed and I would try to run out of the room, and I'd be frozen in my space, just like frozen mid-stride against like this immovable energy, or just, it felt like you were just frozen and you couldn't move. There was a force holding you still. And you couldn't scream because nothing would come out. And I had that memory over and over again. I had another memory. I had that dream over and over again. And I had another dream of being in a military base. And this went on for a long time. So I had that in my late teens or early 20s. And sometimes I think early teens too, I had that dream. And it just went on for close to 20 years. And it would always kind of start the same and end the same. Sometimes there'd be fragments of other memories, such as when I was doing ops for, the military. I would go into a janitor's closet, and I'd walk through the door, and I'd be in the military base, because they were using a technology that you could basically teleport yourself. So I was using that on these ops, and I would have that mixed in with these dreams, which were memories coming through. So anyway, I began to realize that something was wrong with this reality. People weren't psychic, some were, but the thing was is that even the most psychic people weren't really that psychic. They didn't have full control over it. And other times there was, fraud and, hoaxes going on and so forth. So I had to kind of weed through that. So the other thing I noticed too is that there was life after death, but we didn't really understand it. Most people had kind of a fear that it didn't exist, so they clung to religions. I noticed there was different religions, and each religion contradicted itself. And pretty much I got a good idea that something was wrong about just about every aspect of this reality. And as I got older and I started having these experiences, I realized that someone somewhere was trying to get my attention, and they were showing me things. They were showing me that there was a different reality that people weren't privy to, but I was because of them, and I didn't know who they were. So my life basically has been a quest to figure that out. So I mentioned three things. I forgot what the third one was, but basically I was trying to figure out what this reality was and why it was the way it was. And what I realized is that technically we are in a type of a simulation. So to describe a simulation, it's not exactly like the Matrix, essentially, but it could be. But it's kind of multi-layered. It's a nested consciousness simulation. Essentially, it starts with amnesia, because you come into this world where you simply can't remember, but you have intuitive urges and sensations, and sometimes you do remember things, and that's what I was going through. So you have amnesia, and that immediately really caught my attention, because something's wrong there, because a loving God wouldn't make you forget. It just didn't seem right. Plus, if you're here to learn things, why would you forget? So it just didn't make sense. Second, I noticed that there was false religions. They contradicted themselves. So there's false belief systems. There's multiple political belief systems. And that, the governments were in the business of obfuscating information to kind of shape your belief system to go along with their agenda. And every government, at least in the past, had seemingly what appeared to be a different agenda, but most seem to be on the same page now in the world with the effort to create a world government controlled by AI. So I realized that the education system, the academic system, in general, science, we had false science. There was just so many major discrepancies and things that I had seen. There was cover-ups. Ancient artifacts were covered up that didn't fit into the historical storyline. And it was just one thing after another. So, that in turn essentially is a simulation, and it began to take shape into what I conceived to be a type of prison system. Because first of all, your mind wiped. And then when I started studying near-death experiences, I kind of the first thing that stood out to me is that no matter what the person's belief system, they saw exactly what they thought that they would see. An atheist would see their higher self, and they would do, or what they thought was their higher self. And this higher self would judge them and make them judge them. They would do a life review and so forth. And then the person would be sent back to their lifetime. So I noticed that was the case. I noticed that some people who believe they're going to hell wound up in hell, or shown hell, essentially, temporarily. And if you were Christian, you had a Christian experience. If you were Muslim, you had a Muslim experience. Jewish, you had a Jewish experience. If you're a Mormon, you had a Mormon experience. It literally was catered to the individual's belief system. And if there's one single truth, then there can't be many different experiences happening when people have like a near-death experience. It just doesn't make sense unless you look at it from the perspective that something is happening that involves deception. And basically, when you die, they're catering to your belief system, and they want people to enter the tunnel of light. And this is where essentially everybody winds up in order to come back here. And so it just became more and more obvious that something was wrong. And then add the alien part of the equation into it as well. That was the one thing that really confused me for many years, because at some point, I began to realize that I was having contact, passive one-way contact with someone. It didn't feel like they were angelic. It just didn't, my intuition, it just was sending me the other way with that. Um, in the beginning, I thought maybe they were angels or spiritual beings of some kind, but I didn't really understand or know what they were. I realized they're obviously not people who've passed away. They're not showing themselves in that way, and they're keeping their identity hidden. And eventually, I reached a point when I was in the cult where the contact started, and I was having contact with what I thought were extraterrestrials. And this is another subject, pretty much. I don't want to get too much into this, but this is something that's very controversial. But the experience that I had is that I was having experiences with military MyLab handlers who were staging false extraterrestrial contact. And they were feeding me a kind of a false history of myself and giving me a false belief system of self. And when I clung to that belief system, I gave them more authority and power over me. And I became more and more abused as a targeted individual and as a mind-controlled individual, having these rather abusive so-called ET experiences. So, going through all of this gave me a completely different perspective than a lot of people. For one, I wasn't so trusting of these entities, these beings, which also helped me to see that there was more than meets the eye with what's going on here. And when it came to spirit guides, I never had any actual productive contact with them. I'm not saying that they're all bad, but I'm saying that a lot of these beings are used to entrap you here. So if you're waiting for spirit guides to help you leave Earth when you die, you may very well be setting yourself up to be recycled. No different than if you were going into the tunnel of light expecting to see your mother and father, and you heard their voices. Maybe you saw their image. So anyway, getting back to this concept of a simulation, it was about 2016, and I had gone through probably, I would say that I think the cult related contact started around 2005, somewhere in there. I had the initial, what actually got me into the cult is I had this experience where I had a telepathic communication. And it was after having an allergic reaction to Singulair, which happened in 2003, which is an allergy drug. And I had a pretty severe reaction. I was sick for a whole week. I was in and out of the hospital. And what happened was after this ordeal ended, I started having very intense psychic experiences. I was hearing people's thoughts and feeling their emotions. And I was striking conversations up with strangers when they were feeling negative or depressed, because their energy field was so strong. And I noticed that the negative stuff came through much, much, clearer than any other type of emotion. And it was something that I could feel that was directional. So I began kind of testing this out, and it went on for about 3 weeks, and then it ended. And I had this telepathic communication with someone. I heard the voice that I didn't know, I didn't see or feel any energy, but it said, you need to find people like yourself, and they're on the internet. So I looked for about 2 years, and that's when I found this Joy of Satan cult. That's when the contact started with the fake ET stuff. So the reason I'm going over this is because this is a whole discussion else, for another subject. But this gave me an incredible amount of information and experience. And plus I did years of research. So what I concluded is that we were in a consciousness simulation, because going back to one of the things that I was really curious about is that why were some people psychic, but the majority of the population wasn't? That there was something going on here, and that there was a higher order of authority over humanity that wasn't showing itself, but masqueraded as angels and evil spirits and a lot of other things. And not that those things don't exist, but this hidden hand that was controlling world, basically humanity's future, and who basically their entire history. I realized that humanity was basically being socially engineered by a hidden hand. And I researched, how we've had multiple cataclysms. I also researched the monuments of Mars. What I came to is kind of jumping around here. I'm just trying to give you guys a good background. But I came to the conclusion that we were on a type of prison planet system, and that Mars was also used for the same purpose. And that wherever you see pyramids, that's when you see a type of social engineering program taking place, where these monuments are constructed. And they may be constructed in some cases for positive uses, but in general, for prison planets, pyramids and megalithic temple structures are designed to have mind-altering effects, and they're designed to essentially create religions. And I began to have memories of Egypt and being in front of the Great Pyramid. This was after the Younger Dryas event. And this was after what they call the Great Flood. And by this point, the pyramid had been repurposed now. And it was broadcasting a scalar waves out from it. It also produced a glow across the entire structure. So at nighttime, it looked like the Iron Maiden album cover. It was solid gold looking, but there was no external lighting shining onto it. It was actually a glow that rose several inches off the surface of the pyramid at night. And I remember standing in front of it, and there was a stone pathway going up to the center of it. I'm looking straight up, and there was 2 arch palm trees that were on either side of this walkway. And it's the walkway that's still there today that goes to the center of one side of the pyramid. And it had this incredible energy. It felt like this kind of sense of awe and importance. You could tell that whatever belief system that I had, I only got a snip of it, but the feeling, the emotion that I had, it was like a great privilege, or just like an honor, but something more divine. Excuse me, something more, divine was taking place. It left you at this just a very enchanted type of mindset when you stood in front of it, because it was producing an energy, and the energy geared you towards worshiping something. So at that point in our history, the pyramids are essentially being used for mind control purposes. We see these pyramids and a similar iconography as we do around the world. We see it on Mars and in the JPL images. So I kind of put the 2 and 2 together there, is to say that those 2 planets are part of a prison system. And so I also developed a term called the planetary consciousness simulation. I also call it the AI transdimensional planetary consciousness simulation. To go into this whole thing, I would have to be telling you the whole history of my life of how I've concluded these things. But what I realized is, and this took many, many years to figure this out, is that we are basically living on a planet that is inside of a type of augmented reality. And the augmented reality, essentially, from what I can conclude, is that, we talk about the other side, and we talk about the physical reality. And most people have a kind of a grounding, if they believe in life after death, that there's another side to reality. And when we look into science, and we look for science, to science for answers, and we look at what's available, we find that there's 2 particular things that stand out. And these are non-Hertzian scalar waves. And there's also a particle called neutrinos. And neutrinos have non-physical properties. They don't hold they don't hold a charge. So they don't fit into the normal electromagnetic scheme of things. A neutrino can travel faster than the speed of light. It doesn't have any limitation as far as its speed limit. It seems to be transdimensional in a sense. It can pass, and I heard this analogy before. I was reading in a science magazine, and if you took a piece of lead, like a wall of lead, the distance between the Earth and the sun, and that a neutrino could pass through that unhindered, unrestricted, at any speed, faster than light, or much, much faster, without any resistance, without, it's non-physical. So it has the ghost particle, so essentially it is the ghost particle is what I would call it, because it has the attributes that you're looking for if you're going to identify what a substrate would be for a type of other side or spiritual reality. And the scalar waves are another thing too. They're not part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And through a lot of just intuitive type of memories and things of that nature, as well as experiences that I had in fending off the technology that the military uses, which is the electromagnetic tech and the scalar wave tech, I realized that there is another reality, that it actually is a neutrino universe that we're part of. We're actually inside it, and so that is the real, true reality. But we are in an electromagnetic universe. We have Hertzian waves essentially. So um, everything that we find in science points to electromagnetism as being the key to understanding everything. And we also have something very unusual in this particular reality too. We have something called linear time. Now that seems strange to say it that way, but when you've experienced nonlinear time and you realize that in this neutrino universe reality, there is no linear time. It is, time can flow in reverse, it can flow forward, it can stop, it can go sideways, it can go left, or however you want to put it. What I mean by going sideways essentially is multiple timelines can be experienced at the same time. So you can have a type of multi-dimensional point of view or way of experiencing reality. And anyway, I wanted to talk about a memory that I had. So I'm kind of jumping around here. This isn't like a detailed presentation. Otherwise, I'd be much more organized with my thoughts here. But I'm just it's kind of an on-the-fly interview. I just want to let everybody know who I am and what I think this reality is. So I had this experience, and for a very long time, and this goes way, way back before I knew that I was a MyLab, I would always cry when I watched something about near-death experiences. Anything to do with the afterlife or near-death experiences, any type of depiction that someone would have a memory of what they would call heaven or what they would think of heaven would always get me emotional. Also, too, throughout this whole experience, I've had to put up with alien love bites and various different things. And I've recognized that there's people in my life now that are actually part of a different reality that I've been involved with. So I was involved with them in a different, either another lifetime in the programs or actually a completely different reality. And the ones that were from the completely different reality, there's one particular person. And anyway, I don't want to get into the whole history of her and I, but this feeling that I had where I would get emotional when I watched near-death experience videos or read about it was exactly the way I felt about her. So I started to realize that I was missing home. And I mentioned earlier that I was put through a false awakening. So when the military handlers were masquerading as ETs, they were trying to hijack what that feeling meant to me. So when I thought of home, which was a very strong, intuitive, instinctual feeling. I mean, I used to look at the stars at nighttime, and I would start to cry because I knew that I belonged somewhere out there, but I didn't know that where I really belonged was something like that. It looked like that, but it was a different reality altogether. I knew that there was a home that I belonged to, where I was happy and where I fit in, and this wasn't it. And I went through a long period of time, close to 20 years after they initiated contact, where I was put through this false kind of experience where I was being programmed essentially to stay in military custody. And how they were doing it is they were masquerading as ETs, but also telling me that I was part of this fictitious ET race they referred to as Hajayan. There may be a Hajayan race out there, but I certainly wasn't part of it. And this was not legit contact that I was going through. They were staging it using a variety of ET and basically military, developed mind control tech, mostly from ET technology. So anyway, let me get something to drink. They were hijacking what this emotion meant to me. And recently, it was less than a year ago, well, probably a little over 6 months ago, I had this experience, and it had to do with a financial issue. I was facing foreclosure, and I didn't know what my future held. And I thought that things were pretty much going to go the wrong way, and I had no way to pay. I had no way to catch up on my mortgage at that particular moment. And I thought about what would happen if I wound up homeless. And at that point, I realized I have too many health problems, too many struggles. I had no job at that point. It was really difficult. I had to sell stuff to pay the mortgage, and I was looking at, I was pretty much thinking that this is probably going to be the end of me at some point. Either I'm going to die at my own hand, or I'm going to die from the elements, or I'm just going to die of despair if all of this takes place. And about a year or so before that, I started doing a little bit of altar integration. I had an altar come through that showed me that he was in the secret space program. And he told me, essentially, I had a bunch of questions for him, and he kept his contact with me very, very limited. But one of the questions that I had for him is, how do I get out of the soul traps when I die? And he says, don't worry about that. He says, you've already gotten out, essentially, in the future, all timelines, you get out, but you'll remember it before you die. So he also said a lot of other things that came true, and there's a couple that haven't yet. Because the situation isn't right. So I don't really trust altars, but this one, when they show me evidence and they show me that they're not being controlled by the handlers, then I have to give some trust in them, especially when things that they said are correct. So this had a lot of weight, to it, and I feel that this information is correct. So I just kept the faith. And so in this particular evening, when my wife was on the phone with a mortgage company getting this terrible news that I knew was coming because I could feel it. And ultimately, I got help from a family member to get out of this. Then I got a job. I got back into the workforce. But this is before I was stabilized. So I'm sitting there on the couch and I'm waiting for her to hear the bad news. And then I heard it, right? And then they put her on hold. And so here I am sitting there, and all of a sudden, I'm confronted with the potential end of my life. What's going to happen? I'm at this crossroads, and I instantly, I start to sense in my third eye, and I start to actually shift into two different realities, or three total. I see myself in the void, and I immediately know that I'm looking at myself in the future, not just looking at myself, but I'm experiencing myself in the future. At that moment, I also realized that I was seeing things from a third perspective, and this would be the oversoul perspective, or what other people refer to as the higher self. And this is what I was referring to, is that outside of this universe, the electromagnetic universe, you have a completely whole being. You exist outside of this, and you're there at a constant. Because you have to remember, time doesn't exist in the way that it does here. It's non-linear. So you could project your consciousness into this reality, but it simultaneously still be there and have never left. Because there really isn't a flow of time. It's just pure presence, just pure awareness. That's the difference. It's a reality without time. There's a succession of events, but they can be reversed, and everything can be experienced simultaneously or in various different ways. And so I was experiencing this side of myself, and this is essentially a lattice work of cells. It can be an endless network of cells existing past, present, and future simultaneously, because on that side of things, you can essentially experience everything that you want to. There's nothing kept from you. It literally is the heaven that people instinctually feel exists, such as when earlier we were saying that I think I mentioned something like, when we lose someone, the general consensus is they went to a better place. It isn't just a positive notion. It's actually coming from intuition that people still have. Now, there are people that become NPCs. They just kind of break away and they separate from that higher self or oversoul. The connection is essentially there still, but it's never destroyed. It just weakens to the point where there's no flow of intuition, and they get completely immersed in the social programming. So they just they're running a repetitive program. They think, okay, I'll go to heaven or hell if I'm good or bad, and I live my life, and I work, and I most of my time goes to my job, and then I pay my bills, and then I grow old and I die, and then mind wiped and repeat. They don't even realize, they don't even think about that. They think they're going to heaven or hell, and then they wind up coming back here. So, but but anyway, getting back to what I was saying, I'm having this multi-dimensional type of experience from 3 places at once. So I could see a void, and strangely enough, there was a circle, like a window, like a portal in a ship. And there was 2 silhouettes there. One was my oversoul, as I am as a whole being, which you can change, you can be whatever you want. But you are a whole consciousness that can see everything and experience everything at once, or individually, or however you want to see it. It's just a matter of perspective. It's not like being here where you're locked into this point of view. And the next to me was my soulmate, the person that I mentioned, a woman that I met who lives in another country. I won't get into that. But but anyway, her oversoul was standing right there, because we're actually soulmates. We never left each other, and we're still in that reality. So I got to have this incredible experience, because now I realize that, and she would always tell me when I would just, I would feel horrible about the fact that we're on 2 separate lives. She lives all the way on the other side of the planet. We have 2 separate lives, and there's a lot of distance. And she'd always say to me, we were never apart. And this completely rang true when I had this experience, because I realized that the reason she was saying that is because she felt that intuitively. She didn't totally understand what it meant. I think but she had more of a grasp of it than I had up to that point. But when I experienced this, I realized that she was completely correct. Were never apart at all. It's just that this world, this reality, is a type of, it's almost like an illusion or a dream. And the perspective that I got from that part of myself was that it's like, and this is the best analogy that I can come up with. Her and I were standing in a room, and we're looking at the earth. Or we're looking at the universe. Much better if you think about the universe as either an egg or a sphere. And the entire universe is inside the sphere, and it's like floating above, say, like a desk or something, like a globe. And we came to this reality together to do a mission, and all we had to do to get there was focus our consciousness, focus our attention at this universe. And then a piece of us, a piece of our consciousness, because time doesn't exist there. So you could technically leave and be gone for a long period of time and come back, but you never left. And that's how you have to look at this. So, and it's very difficult to understand and relate to this unless you've experienced it. So I'm doing the best I can with explaining it. It's just something that everyone should experience, because if they did, they would have, it would answer a lot of questions, and it would lead to a lot more discoveries of self. And they wouldn't have the fear that they have over, what happens when you die. They'd also have an intuitive roadmap on how to get out. So I'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, I was experiencing that, and I was realizing that we for the moment, it was like a blink of an eye. It was like a blink of an eye to that point of view, to that perspective, my oversoul, that we were here. But who knows how long I've been here? And just this lifetime alone, the older I get, it feels like time is speeding up. But nevertheless, it's a long time, especially those early age, the first 20 years of life is the slowest. But needless to say, there's been multiple lifetimes. So it's been a long time, and I could have experienced things in like parallel selves as well with the altars. All that is added time too. Anyway, I realized that we were never apart, and that I was having that experience. I also realized too, something fundamentally important is extremely important, and everything kind of came full circle. And that's that emotion that would make me cry. It would make me, I would get this upwelling of emotion. I'd feel it in my throat, and then I would weep. And I could feel it all through me. It was a very, and it's still there, and it's only gotten stronger, and it's been with me my entire life since I was a child. And whenever these experiences would happen, it would remind me of that. So I realized that that emotion was this that I was feeling when I was connecting with my oversoul was that same emotion that I had felt when I had my near-death experiences, or no, when I was researching. I never had one, but when I was researching near-death experiences, when I would think of home or conceptualize where home was, and even during the time when I thought it was just in a planet somewhere in this universe, because I was fed all of these lies by these military handlers, I still had that intuitive emotion that came from deep within, and it was the same exact energy that my oversoul had. Also, too, as I got the handler's control and as I pushed it out of my life, I started having what people would call experiences with source or experiences with the creator. And I also noticed too that feeling was the same feeling that I got from my oversoul. So the sense of God, the sense of my oversoul, that emotional energy signature, and all of these upwellings of emotion that I had across my life, from researching near death experiences, um, to meeting people that were from from other lifetimes, and other realities that I was part of. All of that was the same exact emotional frequency. And what I identified in this moment, because this probably lasted 30 seconds that I had this experience, is that I recognized that that was the frequency of home. I also recognized something fundamentally fascinating with this, is that in the source field, you don't travel from point A to point B by going through the space in between. You essentially will yourself from one point to another. And when you will yourself from one point to another, what you're doing is you're shifting frequency. You're matching your frequency to your destination, and you're instantaneously there. And this is the same way that spaceships travel long distances, souls travel, and so forth. They're basically frequency shifting to match their destination. So where you're at and your electromagnetic frequency of where you're at here, as well as the frequency of this, I would call it the frequency cage, they have to match. But in the case of this, I was experiencing this outside of the electromagnetic universe, so the same thing applies. Also, too, I want you to hold that perspective. The perspective where I saw myself after death and in the void. This was another thing that was a big concern for me, and it was quite an experience to have felt that, but also feel, not just feel, but live in the future for just a moment after death. And what I realized was, you see, when you imagine things and you conceptualize things, you usually pull from information like pre-existing belief systems. Okay, information you've learned or things that you've heard, they all kind of shape your visualization, your mental hypothesis of what you're trying to imagine. So if you're trying to imagine the void, I've heard many different things, such as when you're in the void, look for the tubes, and that's like Wes Penn. Like I said, it's either Penn or Penry. He writes about escape, like holes within this frequency fence, or like tubes or holes, and that they open and close. And this is, like the Van Allen belts do the same thing. So, you hear about that, and you hear about people going through astral travel, and they're traveling through different realms and things like that. And then you hear people talking, they go a little further, they talk about the frequency fence. So this is as far as you can go, that there's like a cage around the earth, and there's other realms you can go to. But they're always talking about traveling almost in a 3D spatial sense. So what I experienced was that if you were traveling in the 3D spatial sense, you were actually traveling when inside a type of AI construct. This is basically the simulation afterlife phase. So you have this a 5 sense reality here, unless you're in a psychic bloodline. then you're going to have a weak sixth sense. But you're essentially locked to five senses within the simulation. And you're told that's it. That's the common belief that everything else is hocus pocus and just myth and magic and so forth. Anyway, lost my train of thought there, but getting back to
magic. You were talking about the myth and magic and the afterlife.
I know, but there was something I was going to tie it into, and I just kind of lost my train of thought when I got something to drink. It was a minor, point. But anyway, just kind of jump back to what I was saying with this situation with the void. Okay, so I'm in the void, and I remember what I was saying. When you conceptualize something, you're pulling from information you already have. Okay, so when something like this happens to you, and you get new information, and you have a very profound experience, and one that doesn't play by the rules of your belief system or by anything that you've ever heard before, that's when it grabs you and you realize, hey, I had a real experience here. This is something right up there with a near-death experiences or an out-of-body experience. Plus, when you consider the fact that my alter told me that I would remember this, and that I'd have this, he didn't explain that I'd have this experience, but he said, you'll remember in some form or fashion. And this is how it was coming through. And how it was such a fundamental shock to my system, and just like this beautiful revelation that emotion that I was so familiar with, that emotional energy signature, was the frequency of home. And I finally realized that it was like, that's all I really needed. So that's what I wanted to say. But anyway, back in the void, I'm in the void, and I recognize one thing. There's no sense of 3D space, which was something that I wasn't expecting. So you can check that on the list of a new experience that's fundamentally different from anything that I had invested myself in regard to what I consider my own personal belief system. So meaning, and what I mean by that is it's pure presence. There was no sense that anyone could be behind me, because there wasn't anything behind me. Everything that I was seeing was in front of me. That's the state that I was inside this void. So it's not like somebody could sneak around and get you, drag you into the tunnel of light, or drag you off to hell or whatever. It just doesn't work that way. And I also, up to this point, I'd been realizing for the longest time, and it took a long time for me to figure this out. And this is something my soulmate helped me with. It was one of the major things that she did for me. She made me realize over years and years of interaction with her that I was giving consent to the targeting. I was giving consent to being a program victim, and that they had to coerce me and coerce consent out of me in order to gain the control that they had. And and these layers of consent, they come in many, many forms, and where you wouldn't even realize that you're actually giving consent. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about, Michael. If you believe something, if you believe you're going to be caught in the soul trap, you may very well be caught in the soul trap, because your belief system is such that, hey, there's no way out, I'm screwed. I think that's what you were alluding to. So if you believe that this is a prison and you're not getting out, you're pretty much put the shackles on for your captors, and you're not getting out. You've given them what they wanted. So there's various ways that you can be giving consent, and most of it is subconscious. And just like in our speech, when you call your psychic abilities a gift, you're saying that someone external had the authority to give me this, but in fact, this was taken away from you. You were put into a psychic family. That wasn't your choice, essentially. There's a reincarnation system that puts you here. It's another discussion altogether, but it's a very orderly system of how you find where you find yourself in this reality, and especially in this planet. So you're giving consent to everything. When I realized, so when I added that in, I learned from that I was actually in control, and that we create our own reality, both individually and collectively, but the simulation tricks us into creating the reality that those who control the simulation want. And that would be the extraterrestrials in this case. I'm not going to get into the greater cosmic consciousness simulation concept, because the time frame is pretty limited here, but just this planet itself is essentially a prison, but it's a prison of perspective. If they can convince you that you're not leaving, you're staying. You've basically, it's like in any type of trauma-based mind control. It starts with amnesia, the application of trauma, and then essentially programming. So you got social programming, you got the trauma, you got all the entropy and the harshness of reality and how terrible people treat one another and everything that you go through here, the pain and suffering. And of course, the amnesia. So we're in a trauma-based mind control, just the foundation of our reality has the 3 pillars of trauma-based mind control incorporated into it. Anyway, getting back to this void situation. So I realized that consent, that I had control here. And as a mind lab, I know that when you die, they're not going to just let you slip through their fingers. They need the original self to be kept in society under a type of suppression protocol, and in a psychic family and so on. And they need that because that's you're like a petri dish. They have to keep taking from you in order to create these altars and to create this breakaway civilization and do whatever the hell they want to do with you. So they don't want you to get away. So what they do is they hit you with a frequency. It's different from regular people. Regular people get love bombed and they can usually remember they just died and they have this near death, because people recount this in their near death experience. I just remember my kids, and I went through a life review, and I looked at all of my family and how they were going to do after death. And, you know, and it all looked like I needed to come back, or maybe if it didn't, then they move on and they want them coming back anyway, or going someplace and then coming back wherever. But needless to say, there's something there that's in control. And getting back to what I was saying in the void here, without overdoing this, I saw the tunnel of light appear, and it was a bright light, and it grew, but it didn't get closer. It just enlarged itself with intensity, because there wasn't any type of spatial type of 3D reality taking place here. So it grew, and as it did, the first thing I said to myself is, there it is. And I instantly knew because I said that to myself in the future, after death in the void, that I had full coherence. This was different from what happens with my labs. You know, typically they get hit with a frequency that makes them forget the context of the current moment. In that confusion, this is what my alter explained to me. He says, in that confused state, they can then do the recycling. And what they do is they send a craft. This has been remote viewed by the Farsight Institute as well, that there's military bases that retrieve people like us. And they go out and they'll have a cloaked craft. They know roughly when you're going to die. And they're always in the air anyway. And Farsight's proven that with doing infrared video at a certain particular exposure rate. They've been able to find spacecraft in our skies everywhere they went. There's no place that you don't find it. It's like a giant aircraft. I mean, it's like basically, we're like international, we're like cosmic airspace. So it's like being near an airport, but it's all over. And we just can't see them. So they're there, and they come close, and they hit you with the love bomb, that frequency. The first, it gives you a temporary amnesia effect. Then it makes you feel incredibly comfortable, and that's when the light appears. At this point, I didn't feel the attraction of the light because I was already deflecting the energy. It wasn't able to get to me, and I was fully coherent. But I knew that on the other side of that light, there was a My Lab asset retrieval team. I could sense it, and I was totally aware of it. I couldn't see them because I was just perceiving what I was perceiving at this moment. So what I did was, as an offensive measure to stop the tunnel of light encroaching, is I produced my own light. I have a very strong aura, and that light outshined the tunnel. And then what happened is that it kind of retreated, but it stayed static. It didn't get any bigger. It just stayed small. It was like a spot about that big. And at that point, that's when, and this is how this went, at that point, that's when I realized this little hole appeared with those 2 silhouettes that I was talking about. That was the oversoul and my soulmate's oversoul. I immediately began to feel that emotion. I knew what I was observing. I knew what it was. and I felt that emotion. That's when everything kind of came full circle, and I realized that those near-death experiences that I was, researching and I would get emotional over, and all of the psychic experiences that I had where I would become emotional, it was the same frequency that I was experiencing coming from that part of myself, as well as my soulmate's oversoul. And I felt the love coming through. And here's the thing: when you get love bombed in the void, it's an external force. You feel it. You feel it kind of fill you, but it's coming external. Now, most people would probably overlook that and not even realize that it's coming from an external source. Or maybe they just took it all in as just the way it is. Like, God's there, my loved ones are there, and I'm feeling their love. That's not the way out. You have to feel, what I found out was, in order to get out of the whole shebang, the whole simulation itself, this includes not just the planetary consciousness simulation, but the electromagnetic augmented reality overlay of the cosmic consciousness simulation, which is this universe. And if you remember that analogy I gave, where you're like your oversoul and you're staring at this mass that's just kind of floating there, and it's this universe, and you project yourself into it. Well, essentially, the frequency that I was feeling was from outside of that. So I was tapping into a frequency from the neutrino universe, which we're in, but we're in an overlay. And I'll get into that if we have time and how that works. But anyway, at this moment, I immediately did something that was totally unexpected, because I was tuning into that, because I wanted to go home. And I was feeling this love from myself. It wasn't coming from the light. It was coming from me. I was identifying with that energy, but I was feeling it inside myself. And I could tell that it was one and the same, but it had two different origins, and it wasn't the tunnel. So I was being pulled in a different direction. And I literally felt a very subtle pulling sensation, but it wasn't a physical pulling sensation. I think people who describe the tunnel of light, sometimes I've heard them talk about accelerating or feeling a pulling. You're going into the tunnel, and it's a type of movement that comes along with that pulling. You're actually seeing yourself go into the tunnel, and sometimes you travel at a high rate of speed. Other times it's a little different, but you're going into something. In this case, the pulling that I felt was an emotional pulling. It's like loving someone so incredibly deep, and then being apart from them, but feeling that connection. Like, you haven't heard from someone you love a tremendous amount, and then you finally hear from them after a period of time, and you make that connection. But leading up to that, you feel that pull, you feel that need to connect. So I was feeling that, and it was a bit different than anything that people had described or what I had thought it would be, because it was coming from within, is what I'm saying. So I was matching my frequency with this neutrino source field, as I call it, which is actually not the other side. It is true. It is the true reality that we're all in, but we're in an augmented reality overlay. And what that means is that this universe essentially was created by taking the real universe, a piece of it, and creating an electromagnetic overlay over something that doesn't have basically what I'll describe as the universe. It's a neutrino field, a neutrino substrate. And our thoughts, our collective reality, both individually and collectively, that we talk about being able to create, is actually a scalar waveform. It's a standing scalar wave, which is basically when two waves converge, they create a static scalar waveform, like a peak, and they're like a wave in the ocean. So if you can imagine a substrate of neutrinos that is conscious and then thinks, and then we generate reality through scalar wave output. That's the true nature of the universe as I experienced it. But what we're experiencing here is a type of AI augmented version of that, where AI puts in limitations. So in other words, you have amnesia, for example. You're not able to move from point A to point B. You have to get into a spacecraft. you have to do a lot of different things than you would if you're on the so-called other side. You don't need any of those things. In this earth, it's very restrictive. In order to communicate telepathically, you can't unless you're using tech. But you can also do it through a telephone, through the computer, through a letter. There's a, you can send you can put a note and stick it in a wine bottle, throw it in the ocean, and hope somebody gets it and reads it. These are all forms of communication. But there, essentially, you have an individual, but you also have a collective mind that you tap into. So everything is available to you. Every place is available within a spectrum that you're able to operate in. So in other words, there's there's higher levels of reality, and if you're able to access them, you can access the highest level of reality and everything that's below that. So within that spectrum, that's where you can call home, because you can go anywhere you want within that, but you do it by frequency shifting. So to make a long story short, Michael, what I experienced is that the way to get out of the void after death is that you have to first identify the frequency of home. And in order to do that, you have to shed the belief systems that come along with this experience. From day one, you have to look at your life and do an audit and say, all of these different things that I've heard or I thought I knew or I was taught or read about, however I obtained this information, a lot of that has to go out the window. And you have to stop thinking in 3D terms, and you have to stop thinking in religious terms. You have to shed all of these different belief systems. And what you're doing is you're shedding the various layers of the simulation itself. You have to get rid of those superficial inner first layers, such as false science, false religion, any type of false belief system. All of that has to go away. And you have to look at life in a different way. And what I did was, from the very beginning, and this is because I had these experiences, chances are if I didn't have the experiences, I probably wouldn't have taken this path in life. But what I did is I knew that, number one, I had to expand my emotional span. I had subconscious, trauma come out of me from my altars, from being in these programs, where I got to the point, without going through trauma in my life as a young kid, where I couldn't cry. So I had to expand my emotional span. And one of the things that that this experience does to us is it limits our emotional span through the application of repetitive trauma. So as a protective mechanism, we get a smaller and smaller emotional span. We become less interactive with our environment. And we cut ourselves off from people, from animals, from plants, from the planet itself, the whole collective human experience. And that's because we live in a trauma-based mind control system. And this is what the elites are dishing out to us. So that limits our ability to tap into our intuition and to help one another and fundamentally transform our reality. Because if you're in a fear-based low vibration or low state of mind or emotional state, you're very easy to manipulate, and you're very easy to steer, and you're very easy to control. And so you have to shed all of that stuff. And you have to think out of the box, and you have to look at the world and reality in a different way. And you have to do the inner work, and you have to heal. And I realized that I came to this world essentially to do a mission. Some people say, hey, these missions are part of a deception, and that it's all BS. It isn't BS. What happens is that when we come to this reality, like I said, you're standing outside it as the oversoul, and you project your consciousness into this reality. And part of the reason you do it is because I know the reason that I did it. The reason that I did it is because I needed to come into this reality to help others who are going to come after me. The goal is to essentially wake people up so that they realize that they're in a simulation, but not just the planetary one, that the entire universe is a type of false reality. It's mostly real, but it's augmented. So there's an alternative to this. And I come from essentially a collective of consciousness that seeks to end this universe and, to completely cancel it out by waking people up to the reality that they're in an augmented reality and it isn't true, and they're not in the real reality. So by waking people up to this, and also by having this experience and going through what it would be like to be someone of what I am, which is useful to these program handlers, which is useful to the military and the ETs, I had to come here and essentially go through this experience. And the main reason for that is to determine what could, or actually what is possible in this environment. What can certain people do with certain skill sets who come here? So I was put through a tremendous suppression protocol, and I survived it, which is proof positive that it's possible if you change the way you believe, if you change your belief system, and you realize that this is about engineering consent, that you can take back control and reverse a lot of what's being done to us in these military MyLab programs, as well as society, because evil in general needs our consent in order to carry out its agenda. So I'm different than many, many other people that have come here, including yourself. I mean, it's kind of the same mission. Here to wake people up, but also for me, I think there's a connection between myself and the simulation itself at a very deep level. And that, because I know that essentially I had basically dedicated my existence to bringing down any type of control system like this, where people's consciousness are manipulated, where they're living under tyranny. I've always fought against that. So the human soul trade, the simulation that we're in, the suppression of consciousness on this planet, as well as the general overall universe and how this is designed, I fundamentally feel that this needs to come to an end, and this is why I'm here, essentially. So if that makes sense, go ahead.
Yeah, I have an interesting question for you, because as we're talking about, like, near death experience, I've interviewed people and yeah, they talk about the tunnel. But what about the people, and I'm asking because I had this experience as well, is you don't experience the tunnel. You're here, then you're somewhere else, and then you're back here, and you don't have a memory of the tunnel. Are you bypassing that program and going straight to, like you're saying, home, and then coming back to complete, your deal? Or is that another piece of
It's a
the
very good
program?
I really can't answer your question. I mean, I'm adding information to the overall picture. I'm bringing my perspective or my experience in, but I really don't think we know. And the problem is that when you try to remote view these types of things, it's possible to have that obfuscated. So you still see, you may be confident you could see it or you could remote view it, but what's the error rate? What's the rate of obfuscation? You can never be 100% certain. I would say, it's possible. I would say it's very possible that it could be one of two situations. One, you're in a different program that the AI is carrying out where you don't have a near-death experience like your typical one. And what I realized is that generally people that are that are very good at explaining things, or very altruistic, they have charisma. They're the type of person that would carry the message of the near-death experience to the masses, essentially. They'd write a book, they'd go do podcasts, they'd do interviews, or they would just tell as many people as they could, and they would incorporate it into their spiritual belief system. Say they were, like a Christian, and, well, I had this experience with Jesus when I died, and they would tell everybody. That helps the system itself maintain continuity. They need people to go back and come back to after death to be to be revived, to put the message out that there's nothing to worry about. And that's always, for most part, the popular near-death experience. It's like everything's great, just go into the tunnel, or whatever your experience was. So you need people like that. Now, on the other hand, you're not seeing the tunnel. So what's happening? You could either, it's possible that this is an alternative experience. You may be going to a temporary holding area, and you may be having like say an alternative reality type of experience where you're someplace else, maybe another lifetime. There's a lot of things that could happen, and you could also, it's possible for a moment that you see things as through your oversoul's perspective, and then you're confusing that with maybe something that's more 3D oriented, and you think that maybe I had a different lifetime. But either way, you came back. And when I also, to shed light on this, essentially, this may help you understand this. When I had this experience, I realized that that even if you could be incredibly duped by the entire control system, say you believed everything you heard, and you were extremely religious, you had a very, very closed mind, and all of these things, it's still possible to be pulled out of the simulation by your oversoul. Generally, there has to be a connection there, but I do believe there's a point at which you can pull your fragment back, essentially, and pull yourself out of it. And because there's no time on the other side, I'll call it the neutrino source field. You could be here for millions of years, and it could be intentional. And at some point, at your lowest of consciousness, where you're just totally a working stiff and nothing more, you die and you're pulled out of it. So I think the oversoul ultimately has the control over it, but there may be something that has to be done first, possibly, or that part of you, that your overall whole self, has to reach a point where they're tired of it and it's time to get out. They've done everything they could. It's time to get back out. So, and that may account for what you're talking about too, that the oversoul is pulling the person out and it's not being controlled by AI. So there's other things that are very possible that could be happening here. I don't think that these ETs, I don't think that it's, the AI that's actually running the entire universe itself, which is essentially an augmented reality between 3 and 5D. I don't think it has the ultimate authority over us. I think as long as we keep ourselves grounded here, we're going to stay here. For example, if you have memories of being an extraterrestrial and they're valid, and that's where you believe you need to go when you die, that's most likely where you're going to go, unless they can entrap you to keep you here, because somehow you wound up here within that particular reality. It could be as a punishment. Who knows what the case is? There could have been a war on a planet, and they grabbed up as many people as they could, took them prisoner, and dispersed them on worlds like this under amnesia. So you could be in a situation like that. You could be here because you wanted to come here, because there were people here that you needed to help. You needed to let people know, hey, we're in a simulation where there's ETs controlling our planet. We need to learn to love one another. We need to prevent them from socially engineering us to be self-destructive and hateful towards one another like they constantly do. So there's a wide variety of reasons to be here. And I think ultimately, I think that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where we can't get out. It's just while we're here, we may get stuck for quite a long time before we figure out how to get out. And it's possible that that could last for eons of time, perhaps, and could also transfer over to another world like this, where you're in it, because I believe there's a system of other worlds that fall within this simulation tech that they're using, because this is like the prison side of the Milky Way, essentially. So if that answers your question, or at least gives you a little more insight, that's my perspective on it.
No, it does, and it brought up another question that I was thinking about, and we're talking, about the desire to go home and how you can go home, and in essence, I like to call it in metaphysical terms, you create a window where you can transition, go home, or you can stay here and continue until your next moment. Do you feel like, when people sit there and are like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, and they feel stuck and they don't have the quote window where the opportunity is arising or they don't see it, that's why they do what they do? Or do you feel like the My Lab is like, hey, you kind of aren't being resourceful now. We need to start over. And they're like, hey, we're going to plant this thought in your mind of you're no longer valued here. You X yourself out and start over.
From my experience, and I can only describe things from what I experienced, is that I always had an intuitive sense. Hold on a second. I used to, no.
Oh,
If
sorry.
you
There you go.
get any good questions, let me know. I answer them. It says, used to feel this many years. Okay. What I felt was essentially is I felt like I was trapped. I felt like I wasn't fulfilling my purpose. And I think that's where a lot of the anxiety comes from, where you want to leave because you feel stuck and you can't do anything. And that's where they like to keep you. So for me, it was a heavy suppression protocols, a lot of suffering and so forth. But I wasn't doing things that were fulfilling for me. And ultimately, what I realized is that once I got through what I had to go through, that was actually that. Well, here's what I realized. This is the catch of this. It's like an epiphany, just like I had with the emotional frequency I was talking about. I was deeply unhappy. They made me suicidal. And one of the reasons that they do that is because they need consent. So if you want to die in the first place, it gives them consent to essentially pull the plug whenever they want and recycle you back into the system so they can keep using you again for the next cycle and keep making the clones. And then, you'd come back as a child and you'd be abducted again and they start new clones and same alters would go into them, but you'd have new genetics. So I basically, I knew that I wasn't really fulfilling my purpose and I wanted to die as a result of it. And they wanted to keep me in that mindset. So as long as I gave them control, I had no reason to live. And that's just the way it worked for me. So I don't know if that answers your question, but at least it gives you an idea that I've been through something similar to that. Now, once I got them out of my life and I was no longer being programmed to believe what they had me believing, and I felt that I had control again, and I was able to start manifesting things through actual hard work and just effort. Whereas before they were hijacking my effort, they were taking my energy, they were just robbing me of everything. When I got the basics back and I started to be able to do things, I realized that I was meant to do all of this crap that I've been through. This is where the epiphany came in. Is that every time that I gave them consent, okay, and this isn't everybody's story, this is mine. Every time I gave them consent, I was entrapping them because I came here for the most. I would say the most important aspect of what I was doing here was, collecting reconnaissance, collecting intelligence, collecting information by going through this experience in the state that I came in here with. I was somebody with a lot of talents that they could use. So what would happen if I was just basically dropped in with no protection? I don't have ETs that step in and help me. I don't have spirit guides. I don't have angels. I don't have everything that I've experienced has been negative and been false. I do have, and I can't say that 100%. I do get help externally, and then there is beings that are involved with me, but they don't interact. So it's like an experiment. And it pretty much, from what I understand, is if I came here defenseless with no external help but passive help, how would I do? So I was put into a scenario like a test subject. Not by the military, not by the ETs, but by another intelligence that exists that I'm part of outside this electromagnetic universe in the source field. So, to better explain, I'm trying to figure out the best way to explain this. once I got on track with my life, I realized that everything that I had been through that I thought was a disappointment or a failure was actually a success, because I had to go through the cult experience. I had to let the mind control me. I had to go through all of that crap. And it was really for two reasons. One of which was to send information to where I come from so that they could learn how to deal with the simulation, how to send others here, and how to more efficiently handle it and carry out what they have to do to fundamentally transform this reality. But also, too, it was to be able to do what I'm doing now, which was have these experiences, weather the storm, overcome the targeting, and then be able to go out in public and talk about these things without being completely decimated like I used to be able, like I used to get. I used to get heavily attacked leading up to a podcast. I'd get attacked during the podcast, and often I'd get hit with a directed energy attack or something else after. So I would pay for it for weeks at a time. I don't get that anymore. So I'm able to protect myself. So these are things that I had to go through and I had to experience so that I could relay this information to other people. So more or less, I'm basically a Trojan horse to the system. I come in, I learn from their tactics. I develop at least some level of immunity from the attacks and the manipulation. And then I go operational, where I can talk and inform people and provide alternative explanations for things that are taking place that people need, instead of going to mainstream sources. So, and then also too, everything that I experience gets sent back in a form of basically an information packet, if you want to describe it that way. It's an information stream that that runs from me to my oversoul to the collective, essentially.
Yeah. So there is a question in the chat room that came in earlier. Slippery Seabass said, "Is sleep paralysis an abduction? I'm aware and I'm in my bed. My family is usually there, and I think I'm talking out loud, asking for help, and telling them I can't open my eyes."
It could be. There's no way to say one way or another. These experiences. So what happens is when they do the abductions, they will use things to obfuscate what actually happened. So if you remember having sleep paralysis, for example, then that could be your screen memory. In fact, there could have been an abduction that took place during that period. And when you remember back, all you remember is having a sleep paralysis episode. So it's possible. Is every case of sleep paralysis an abduction? No. Is every case a demonic possession or just a spiritual hijacking? No. There's a lot of variation there. It could be something that's happening with your physiology that's causing it. Could be an abduction. Could be a possession of some kind. It just depends, and how you figure this out is you just have to stay observant, look for patterns, and just be patient, because it takes a lot of time to figure this out. I'll give you an example of an abduction that I had that I needed to pursue with hypnosis. When I was a kid, I would say it was probably 6 or 7. I think this came after or shortly before the abduction I had at the park, which is right down the street from my house I'm in now, because I inherited my grandmother's house. So what happened was I was in the room that's directly above me right now. It's where my son's at. And it's like the middle room of a rancher. And I had this sheet that I liked. There was 2 different types of sheets that I had that I would sleep with in the summertime because they were cool and I didn't sweat. So I had a pair of pajamas on, and I don't know what time of year it was. It may have been fall or could have been spring, could have been summer, the air conditioning, I don't remember. But I had this light sheet on and I was wearing pajamas. So if I'm wearing pajamas, I'm probably in the 5 or 6 age, because I wasn't wearing pajamas when I was 7. So it was early. And I remember the bed shaking really violently, like in the movie The Exorcist. And that's what I thought. I thought Satan was coming for me. There's demons or something. And first thing I felt was that feeling of dread and just extreme fear. The same feeling that I had every time that I had that repetitive nightmare where I would jump out of bed and try to run out of the room and scream for help, but nothing would come out and I couldn't move. The same feeling that I felt during my abduction at the park, which was during the day, when I saw 7 individuals that were dressed weird, and they, their faces looked like, tall grays with white skin. So it, like, really chalk white skin. And so it was that same fear, but I would never see the perpetrator. That was the problem. And but anyway, I felt the fear, and then the bed started to violently shake, and this went on for who knows how long. I remember just the screen memory was me laying under the covers with the head in my head was under the covers, and I was holding it, fairly tight. I was tensed up, and I was soaking wet with sweat. And after it happened, and I was probably laying there for a good hour or so before I had the courage to look out and just look around the room, and there's nothing there. But what really happened, I think what happened is that when the bed started to shake, it wasn't really the bed shaking, it was actually me vibrating out of this reality. I was being teleported out of the room in a non-physical way, because they were coming into my room through a portal in every case and taking me out. So there's an example of a screen memory where I remembered something happening that was paranormal in the very beginning of it. And this is what they do. They intentionally leave you with little crumbs or little tidbits of memory when they want to. The idea is to lead you along. And this is what, people will have various levels of memory recall from these experiences. The ETs or the military that are behind us, in my case, it was the ETs and the military. It's always a group effort because there's agreements that are in place. They automatically know, because they use AI to make these decisions. And an AI system makes all of the decisions for each and every person they abduct. This includes the mind control, the entire manipulation and engineering of their lifetime, which is another subject altogether. It's all done by AI. And they told me I was in an engineered lifetime, which means they were manipulating everything. So it gives you that information. It'll feed you little bits of memory, because if they want you to talk or they want you to be aware of the abduction, they will give you clues. In my case, they didn't want me to know that I was being abducted by aliens or the military, but they wanted me to realize or to experience paranormal things, like things that other people didn't experience. So when I had that screen memory, or actually when I felt the shaking, I was led to believe that this was some kind of like negative spiritual being that came into the room and caused the bed to shake, just like in the movie The Exorcist. But in reality, it was them. So, yeah, I don't know if I don't want to sound repetitive, but everything that they do to us is done for a reason. Nothing's left to chance. There are mistakes that are made. For example, you may wake up with your shirt on backwards, or you may wake up facing the wrong direction than when you fell asleep. Your head may be at the foot of the bed. You may wake up naked when you fell asleep with your clothes on. Mistakes like that happen, but in general, across your lifetime, everything is done and planned by AI to essentially shape the way you believe, and it's always for the purpose of controlling you and either using you to influence the rest of the public, or just keeping you under their control in general.
Yeah, and you make a great point, and there actually is one last question, and I know we are like at the hour 30 mark. Do you want to take this question real quick, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, love to.
Lucier Mystery School says, "Hi Nathan, do you think the movie Disclosure is part of this false AI project, or is it helping?"
You can look at it both ways. You can say, okay, we're here's the way I look at it. The Disclosure movie is part of an ongoing narrative that the government is seeding, and not just the U.S. government. It's the shadow government. It's the elites, the cabal, whatever you want to call it. They control the media. They control Hollywood. They control other forms of Hollywood in different countries. So, and this has been going on for a long time. They're feeding the public a controlled narrative. So in that regard, it's not good. But it does help raise the awareness. So it gives both sides an advantage here. So on our side of the fence, more people are going to accept that there is extraterrestrials out there, that the government is covering it up and has been lying about it, because the current disclosure that we're getting is basically false. It's not 100% false, but it's a false, essentially false information stream. That's the reason that the movie released was timed. This was all orchestrated. I'm sure people went to Steven Spielberg and said, we are going to release a certain bit of information. We need you to do a movie. Now, it could also have been subconsciously influenced to where they didn't even have to say anything, but they made sure he got the funding for it. They made sure it was right on time, and they certainly orchestrated its release in time with this release of these documents. As what we're seeing is through these documents that they're not giving us anything that we don't already know. But what it is doing is that it is raising the awareness. So for the average person that never pays attention to this stuff, now they're finally becoming accepting of it as part of their reality. They may not care, but they know that the government at least is willing to say they're out there, but not give us any more information of that. So it goes both ways. But it should, but for anyone, here's the catch here. This is important. If there's any influencer out there that is referencing this movie as being like the heart of, like, the big, reveal, and then they're talking about what the Trump administration is doing, this is going to lead to some big fundamental change in our reality, in our paradigm. We're going to get med beds. We're going to get world peace. We're going to have all of these things. We're going to have a spacefaring society. It's right around the corner. Don't listen to them. That's part of the false narrative, because if that was the case, we would be living in a reality right now that would look fundamentally and feel fundamentally different. We'd have a different government. They would have a different objective. They'd have a different set of goals, and it would be for our benefit, not for perpetual warfare. They wouldn't be lying to us, and they certainly wouldn't be giving us this weak disclosure. So beware of people that are pushing that. Ultimately, it's either people that are doing it because they don't know any better and they're out of their league, or you have people that are being told by military handlers or being told through channeling, and they're not really talking to benevolent ETs. They're not talking to essentially dead loved ones. They're talking to the military industrial complex. They're talking to DARPA, and they're pushing the narrative. So yeah, beware of that stuff. Look within first.
I agree. You always got to use discernment and see what resonates with you. And where can people find you if they have questions about, Project New Awakening or other things that you're doing?
Well, today was my first day off. So I got back into the workforce a little over 4 months ago. And I told people in different podcasts, I said, once I get laid off, I'm going to start my project. So today is the first day of that. So I've got 4 weeks off. I'm going to be doing some podcasts and getting this whole project started so that I can kind of coast the rest of the way when I do get back to work, and I can still do this. So I got a lot of backlogging work to do, a lot of stuff to do. So, this week, sometime towards the end of this week, I'm going to be officially starting the podcast. I got a friend that I'm going to do an interview with. Well, we're just going to have a discussion, not so much an interview. And I've got a couple of other people lined up. And I'm going to be doing weekly podcasts, or possibly 2 or more videos a week, where I talk about different subjects in regard to this whole mess. And I'm going to try to keep them short. So the best way to get a hold of me would be right now, since I don't have a website, would be Facebook. You just look up my name. I don't think there's maybe 1 or 2 people on the planet with a Facebook account other than that have the same name as me. So I'm easy to find, and I'm here in the United States. So you can find me that way, and you can go on YouTube and look up Project New Awakening. You can find the channel there, but I haven't added content yet. So I will be doing it this week. I've actually did a few videos, and I realized that they were all duds, and I got rid of them because they weren't hitting the mark, and I had to get kind of to the right mindset, which required me to be laid off. So here's your answer to your question.
Right.
You can reach out to me on Facebook. I try to make time for people. I can't. I mean, I have to work right now. I'm doing a lot of stuff around the house, and I talk to a lot of people. But I'll do my best to to reach out and respond to you and answer your questions. Also, you can go to my YouTube and subscribe there. I'm going to be adding a Rumble channel. Eventually, I'm going to do a website. But Project New Awakening starts officially this week because I've got all the time in the world now to do a bunch of things for the next 4 weeks. So I'm going to get that started. So if anybody's been out there waiting and just putting it in, wondering why I haven't done this or I keep talking about doing it, it's because it was never the right time and I was being targeted. Now that everything is kind of in alignment, it's time to do it. And I did actually get a message recently that said go operational, which means it's time to do this. And the community is at a crossroads right now because we have been through a tremendous psyop with the president and everything that has happened since 2016 with QAnon and all of this stuff. It's all kind of coming to a head. People are being essentially exposing themselves. People are being exposed to the information that we've all been, believing and hoping is true is turning out to be false. And an emerging paradigm or an emerging picture is starting to emerge, one that's closer to reality than we've ever been, which involves the Epstein files and learning about that. That's a big shocker for people. So this is the time now, I think, finally, where I've reached a point where I'm not being harassed and going through what I was going through, where they can control me. And two, for the first time, I think, since I've been alive and since I've been public, I think that there's a faction of the public, and it's a growing minority within the disclosure community, are willing to be open to this information, are willing to recognize that we have been duped for a long time, and that the New Age movement, just like the 60s music, just like the counterculture movement, just like so many other movements that we've experienced, is just as co-opted, just as hijacked as any other, and that it is loaded with deceptions, and people need to know what they're looking at, and they need to police their experiences, and they need to understand that there are very deceptive forces out there, and that's what Project New Awakening is. I've been through a substantial amount of it. I've went through some of the worst spiritual experiences imaginable, combined with being, the military, and I've had ET abductions and so forth, and I've researched government corruption and world history and all of these things. So I'm finally to the point where, I can start to tie it all together and actually make a difference, even if it's just in a tiny little echo chamber on social media before they kick me off of it, even if that's the case, because basically what I get from my oversoul is that it doesn't matter the size of what you do. It could be a failure from the standpoint of having a limited reach, but as long as you give it everything you've got and you hit the mark that you're aiming for, that I need to hit, as long as I do that, even if I'm the tree that falls and no one ever hears it, I still fell and accomplished that in the forest. So this is the time, regardless of how far it goes. I just have to give it what I came here to do. And that's all that matters. And so that gets rid of the, delusion of grandeur that a lot of people have when they go into something like this. I'm not aiming for the stars. I'm just aiming to do what feels right on the inside, what resonates with me, what I feel is needed right now, basically.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your information with us. And for everyone in the chat room, I know there are still some questions out there, but due to the time, we'll have to have him back on and we can address those questions then. And I just want to say thank you. And I have a quick message for you, Nathan, and that is from my heart and the heart of my shows to you. Thank you for what you're doing for humanity. Thank you for what you're doing for the communities out there. and being your authentic self and sharing your authentic story.
You're very welcome, Michael. Thank you for that. And I'm just thankful that you didn't go like this. My heart goes out to you because you know that upsets some people, man. I got to tell you. I know Arkeem is still trying to get over it.
Yeah.
And hopefully Arkeem comes back in and rejoins the community here at some point. And
yeah, everyone is saying stay awesome and do it now. And there was a comment earlier for you that I just want to reiterate. It says, "You make a lot of sense. I wish you all the best. Let nothing stop you. Full speed ahead."
Well, that's what I hope to do. You know, it's like I said, I'm not immune to the attacks. If I were to say that, I'd be leading people astray. I'm 80 to 90%, which is enough to do this. And there is risk involved, but it really doesn't matter, because what I realize is that, you know, there is some truth to putting things in, you know, to God's hands. So, and that what that means is that, and when you can really say that and mean it, I think is when you reach the point where you're doing what you're supposed to do. Then it doesn't matter what the consequences are, because you're doing the right thing. So when you say it's in God's hands, it technically has already happened. And your oversoul already knows what's going to happen. So it's all part of a plan, and we're kind of just, I guess you could say, we're just catching up with our future self.
Right.
So yeah.
So thank you. And with that, we are going to say good night to everyone. Oh, Rainbow Flame Wizard was saying divine dragon shields and protection sended now. So just offering up some help and protection for everyone.
Oh, that's greatly appreciated. Next time I come on, I can talk about how I eventually shielded some of these attacks, and I can talk about how I. And what's interesting, Michael, save this. This will be a seed for the next discussion. Is that emotion that I felt for home? It actually, your oversoul has a specific tone to it. I can't call it a frequency of sound, because it transcends. Since sound is just air, and the way it, you know, the way it moves through the, you know, through vibration and stuff. But there's a certain tone, and I realize that we all have a type of oversoul tone, like a frequency that matches us. You can hear if you want it, but also too, that emotion, that emotional energy that I talked about, where I was connecting with my oversoul, with the creator, and with this source field or other side, this real universe, this true reality that we're all part of. Excuse me. I was able to pull that energy in the form of an emotional energy and use it to shield myself. And because it had the creator's energy in it, and it was fundamentally at the foundation of it was love, I was able to use that to shield myself. And I created what I call a pocket neutrino source field around myself. It's like a white light shield. But what it does is that I talked about Hertzian and non-Hertzian, you know, like EM, and you know how neutrinos are neutral and how scalar waves are non-Hertzian. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm taking myself out of the EM spectrum by doing this. It's like a radar detector that has a jammer, essentially. I'm jamming my signal, and if they can't get an electromagnetic signature on you, they can't accurately hit you with a do. So I've actually had them kind of like hit me and miss me, where I just kind of felt it like ricochet off my forehead. I've also had them try to get me, and it didn't do anything at all. And my handler would always say, "How do you like it?" You know, like an Arnold Schwarzenegger comment, or like a Dirty Harry. It's like, "How do you like it?"
Yeah.
And then he'd say, "Oh, Nate, you just got hit with a touch of dew, or you got touched with a touch of dew." He would say stuff like that. Well, he doesn't say that anymore because I shut him out, but I got the last word, because I won't even say what I said, but basically he can't hit me anymore, Michael. So that's something we can, you know, we can discuss, and how I did that. And I think we all can do that if we make that connection with our oversoul. I think it's possible. I don't think I'm unique in this in this respect. I think it can be done by everybody if they make that connection. Just like I believe that everyone has the ability to get themselves out of the simulation and go back to the creator, back to the real reality, instead of the one that we're in right now, wishing we were someplace better. So with that, I bid you farewell. It's my final thought.
Yes, thank you. And do like, subscribe, and follow along, because we'll find out when our schedules work and have Nathan back on and continue this. And do also follow along with Project New Awakening with his YouTube channel and his website when it becomes operational, so to speak. And so, thank you, everyone. Blessed evening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you for having me.